When Columbus's massive ships approached the shores of the New World, the innocent inhabitants of the island saw a scene they had never imagined in their entire lives. It seemed to them as if some heavenly thing had emerged from the depths of the sea. Some magic, some strange power, completely different from their world. They looked at those gigantic ships with amazement, and then at the humans descending from them, whose bodies were covered with shining, colorful clothes, who held sparkling iron objects in their hands, and whose voices had sounds whose meanings they could not understand. All of this felt to them as if a new world from the sky had landed on their island. Simplicity was part of their nature. Without thinking, they offered their boats to those strange guests, shared their food, gave them water, and happily talked and laughed with them. They had no idea that these very guests would, in the coming time, prove to be the greatest enemies of their freedom, their land, and their lives. When Columbus stepped onto the shore, the island people ran and gathered around him. They touched his boats, looked at his clothes, and listened with amazement to every word of his language. Columbus spent some time on the shore, observed everything carefully, and then returned to his ship. But his mind kept working continuously. He saw a sign in everything. And above all, he was greedy for gold. A few days later, he again lowered the boats into the water and moved along the coast. By then, the news of his arrival had spread to every corner of the island. The local people gathered at the shore to welcome him, offered him food and drink, and even gave beautiful, colorful parrots as gifts. Columbus's crew gave him red caps and small bells, and the jingling sound of the bells made the island people dance with joy. But Columbus had no such love in his heart. He was smiling, but in his eyes, there was only one thing: gold. He noticed that the people were living extremely simple lives. They had no iron, no weapons, no big houses, no large fortresses. But some people had tiny gold rings in their noses. And this was the very thing that shook Columbus's mind. He remembered Marco Polo's travelogue, in which it was written that near Japan Cipango, there were small islands where people lived and where there was plenty of gold. Columbus assumed that he had reached very close to Japan. There he wrote in his diary that these people were naked, defenseless, unaware, and extremely innocent. They had no iron, no steel, and no skill with which they could attack. With cruel confidence, Columbus wrote that with just 50 men, all of them can be enslaved. This was the thinking that later brought a sea of destruction. Columbus and his men began entering the houses of the local people. They overturned things to search for gold, broke utensils, picked up objects and threw them aside. The local people could not understand why these strangers were behaving like this. Yet they still smiled at them, gave them water, and continued to help them as guests. After spending many days, disappointment began to grow in Columbus's heart. He began to feel that perhaps there was not as much gold here as the travelogue had described. But then, another idea lit up in his mind. He thought, this is just the beginning. The real place is still ahead. Japan, meaning Cipango. Thinking this, he forcibly captured some people of the island, tied them with ropes, and imprisoned them on his ship. His idea was that he would teach them a few words of his language and turn them into guides. Then he would take these guides to the islands ahead so they could help him understand the nearby routes. Maybe behind these islands was the place that Marco Polo had mentioned. But those poor people did not even know the name Cipango. They had no concept of China. They knew nothing beyond their tiny world. And Columbus, rather than understanding, he kept believing blindly. He was searching for a world that did not exist on this path. This misunderstanding gave birth to the greatest collision of truth in history. Columbus never reached Japan. Instead, he changed an entire new world forever. When the guides captured by Columbus paid attention to his words, they realized that this foreign man was talking about a very large island. Those local guides already knew the direction of a big island and the route to reach it. So they began taking Columbus toward that large landmass through their boats. That place exists on our maps today by the name of Cuba. Throughout the entire journey, Columbus was walking under the shadow of a misunderstanding. He had convinced himself that he was about to reach Japan. Cipango. Every island he saw made him think that perhaps this was the place whose golden tales had ignited the minds of Europe. But when he reached the shores of Cuba on the 28th of October, the reality was very different from his dreams. No shine of gold, no royal buildings, no gates of China that he was searching for. Yet he immediately constructed a new imaginary picture in his mind. If this is not Japan, then maybe this is China. Maybe I have reached Cathay, but it was neither China nor Japan. In the faces, houses, and lifestyles of the local people, there is not even a glimpse of the grand cities, written by Marco Polo. Yes, they had golden rings in their noses and ears, and just that tiny shine was enough to ignite the fire inside Columbus. Columbus looked up at the sky in astonishment and perhaps whispered, "Oh God, what is the story of this place? Did Marco Polo exaggerate, or was it all a lie, that there is gold everywhere here?" The disappointment grew. Then on the 5th of December, he held on to another hope. He set out searching for that Chinese city, which was called Olivo in Europe, known today as Chuanzhou. But the place he was going toward had neither Olivo nor China, only another island. On the way a headwind blew, and Columbus's ship began changing direction. This wind brought them almost 100 kilometers away from Cuba, to another large island. Its local name was Haiti. Columbus landed on it on the 6th of December and, according to his tradition, gave it a new name, Hispaniola. This was the moment when the real story of the destruction of the local inhabitants began, a devastation which many historians today call the American Holocaust. Hispaniola was at that time the second largest island of the West Indies. Today, two countries exist here, the Dominican Republic and Haiti. But in that era, it was all one land, and about 800,000 people of the Arawak race lived here. These people too were innocent, kind and harmless as always. They welcomed Columbus as if some lost traveler had reached home. Columbus again felt a strange impression that this might be an island at the edge of Cipango. His religious mindset pushed him toward another idea. He thought that perhaps this was the place from where, according to the Bible, Prophet Solomon used to receive gold and fragrant things. Or maybe this was the region known as the Kingdom of the Queen of Sheba. Although in reality, the region of Prophet Solomon was in a completely different part of the world, and had no connection at all with Hispaniola. This was all just Columbus's habit of fitting every new thing into old books. There was no accurate geography in his mind, nor any logic. But he had one sign that kept fueling his fire: traces of gold. Columbus's men had seen specks of gold in the water of rivers and streams. Then a local chief gave Columbus a gold mask as a gift. Now it was as if he had fully believed that the entire island was filled with gold, and the locals were simply hiding the true place. But the truth was something else. Hispaniola at that time did not have much gold. Whatever tiny amount existed remained hidden in sand. The Europeans did not have modern excavation tools, nor did the locals have the knowledge of minerals. An interesting fact is that today in the region of Haiti, there are reserves of gold, silver and copper worth trillions of rupees. But in Columbus's era, no one knew of them. Despite his disappointment, Columbus decided that he would return to Spain, bring more soldiers and people, and then search the entire island to extract gold. But matters began worsening before that. Columbus's men had a conflict with the local people. In a small dispute, he had 2 innocent inhabitants killed, only because they refused to give the Europeans the bow and arrows they had asked for. These conflicts were still small, but these were the very sparks that were about to turn into a fire. Columbus knew that if he returned to Spain, he would need some strong proof of his success. One of his ships had run aground and broken near the coast of Haiti. He turned this accident to his advantage. He had his men remove the wood and built a small fort, Fort Navidad. This was the first brick of European occupation. In this fort he left his 49 men, so that in his absence they would continue searching for gold. Then on the 16th of January, 1493, he set out towards Spain. As he left, he forcibly took some local people as slaves. Along the way, cold, hunger, and disease claimed the lives of many local slaves. Their deaths were considered by the Europeans as simply making enough space. When he reached Spain, Columbus announced that he had discovered a new route to Asia, and that there was vast gold there. His claims were believed. He was given the title Admiral of the Sea. Celebrations were held, feasts were arranged, and Columbus rose as a hero. But in those very feasts, people also mocked him. Why? Because everyone knew that his new world was not actually Asia. But still, he was not being denied. Time itself had to prove the truth. And this was the time when Columbus's name was about to be linked to the greatest massacre in history. The innocent world of Cuba and Hispaniola was now standing at the edge of destruction. Killing, slavery, cruelty, and ruin. All of this was about to come. What was the end of this? Why were trials held against him? How were the people of Hispaniola able to offer their last resistance? And did they really use a small plant as a weapon to astonish the Europeans? You will see all of this in the next episode of History of America. And if you want, you can also watch the previous episodes of History of America here.